Welcome back, viewers at home. You're still tuned in right here on INX Prime Channel 345. Now, the United Nations chief has called for the UN Security Council to reform its outdated structure and assign Africa a permanent seat. He said it cannot be that a continent with over 1 billion people do not have representation on this powerful body. On Monday, Antonio Guterres told a high-level UNSC meeting that the outdated structure of the body has failed to keep up with the pace of a changing world. When the United Nations was first formed, African nations were still under colonial rule, but they have been consistently kept out of this powerful organ. Now, for more on this, I am joined by Advocate Sipho Mantula, who is a researcher at the Thabo Mbeki School for Public and International Affairs. Good evening and welcome to INX Prime, Advocate.
Evening, my dear sister, even to your viewers.
Now, these are quite significant discussions around the UN Security Council. The fact that Africa, almost 80 years since its formation of the United Nations. Now, is this a case of exclusion and a failure to keep up with the global events?
You know, my dear sister, if you look back at the formation of the United Nations, dating back as 1945, you will understand that one of its challenges was to maintain peace and as well as security. And you will understand that this is not a new debate. 1999, the former President Thabo Mbeki raised the same question when he was talking about the UN reform. So when you're talking about the UN reform system, one of its strongest arm is in the UN Security Council. And that's where you find that during 1945, almost 40% of those former colonizers were part of the UN Security Council. Now, post-1994, that debate came up again during the presidency of Nelson Mandela, when we raised the question that Africa must be represented in the UN Security Council based on the conflicts that Africa has been going through. One will also say that after the First World War in Africa in 1996-98, if you recall the war in Congo, the DRC, that's where again we saw how the UN system has failed Africa. And these debates, as they are coming now, it is the issue not of being excluded, but it's the issue of being silenced. It is the issue of being undermined. And that's how President Thabo Mbeki, again, if I go back in 2021, when he went to the UN, he raised the question of the political will within the UN General Assembly and within the member states, that the UN reform should begin with the UN system of the UN Security Council, which has 5 superpowers who were former colonizers. If you look at USA, you look at France, you look at Britain. We might not involve Russia and China a lot, but you might find that they are now becoming the new colonizers also. But if you look at the broader issue of the UN Security Council, the main elephant in the room is the veto power. We have been given some taste to become non-permanent members, South Africa too. But to be a non-permanent member, you don't have a voice. So that is the reason that I think this debate that has been going on since Monday, it will be important for the media to follow it also next month, as they'll be talking about the future of the UN system. So that's how it is important for us that despite this global exclusion that we have raised, it is also the issue of global inclusion of Africa in the UN Security Council.
Now, Advocate Mantula, I think another question I'd like to ask you is, do you believe this push for reform will finally result in that permanent seat? And why is a permanent seat on this Security Council important for any country, or in this case, Africa?
You know, the permanent seat, it is important, and I want to move away from the issue of security considerations, as the former president also raised it before, that there is a heavy price for you to be a member of the Security Council. But I have raised it before to the colleagues. I said, it is important that we need to understand that to be a member of the UN Security Council, it is just a mere ceremonial, but it is also having authority and power. But we need to understand the UN Peacekeeping Commission, the UN Peacekeeping Fund, who's been managing the UN Peacekeeping Fund in the African continent, with the war that has been going on in Sudan, in the DRC, in the Sahel. So you will understand that for us to be present there, it is not just a ticking box exercise. It is not to veto the power of others who will want to maybe support the war in Ukraine or the war in the Middle East. So it is important for us to understand that our presence in the United Nations Security Council, it must be historic, the same like what President of Sierra Leone has put that case before, Julius Maada Bio, raising the question of the failures of the UN. Because I think Africa will be bringing something diverse. It will be bringing cultural sensitivity, will be bringing national consciousness. It will be bringing the issue of transitional justice. So for the African, we'll be bringing the philosophy of Ubuntu in the UN Security Council. So I think for Africa to be present in the UN Security Council, it is not just a mere ceremonial seat. It should be an impactful presence if we want to be part of the global system.
Now, we've heard that the demand now is for 2 permanent seats in the UNSC as well as 2 additional non-permanent seats. How will this impact the decisions of this important body?
You know, when I look at the numbers from 5 to 8 or to 7 now, you will also be having a tie in some instances when you have to veto some of the powers. But I think what is important here is the geopolitics of understanding that most of the conflicts in the world, they are almost concentrated in the African continent. So it will be important only not for us to go for 2 seats, as we have been saying, 2 seats, but also 2 non-permanent seats. So it will be important for us to go for 4 seats, particularly, as it has been, we will opt for 2 plus 3, because we have been only given 2 seats in the non-permanent. But if we go for permanent, even if we don't get 2 seats, we need to have 1 seat so that we are able to can represent all the 55 member states of the African continent, including Western Sahara, which has to be liberated soon. So if one has to look at the numbers of voting also, it is the matter of the principle, the context, the debates that we will be having in that UN Security Council, because it will be meaningless for us to be in the UN Security Council and we are fighting for the votes. I think what should prevail, it should be our reason, it should be our thinking, it should be our analysis of peace and security in the 21st century, because the dynamics of peace and security has moved now to human security. It is no longer on individuals, it is on Mother Nature, it's on food security. So it is diverse when you think of the word security. And I think that's how our debate as South Africa since 1994 on the UN Security Council has been on the issue of the UN reform system, a global rebooting of the UN system. And I think that's how the debate should move on within the AU, because those seats are not going to go to a member state, but it will be for the AU. And you will even recall that Africa has also been represented at the G20. So this is one of the case studies that we have to pursue in this 21st century, lest we will be failing the coming generation of the African continent.
Now, Advocate, I know earlier on you did touch base on the veto element of, what's happening within the UN. And I just want to know from you to know that there are also calls for the reform of the veto is used by the current permanent members. Do you believe the reform in this department is also needed?
Absolutely, my sister. And that is the debate that I will always try to refer to the former President Thabo Mbeki, because he raised this issue also in his presidency, that the issue of the veto is also political by nature. It is also undermining the question of humanitarian challenges that we are facing, on humanitarian crisis that we are seeing in many African countries and even other European countries that have been going through wars. But if you look at the veto power that has been delayed in the conflict in Sudan, the conflict in DRC, the conflict in the Middle East, and the conflict that is between Russia and Ukraine. So you will understand that the veto power has been used sometimes for nefarious purpose, but sometimes one can say member states who are part of the P5, or what we call permanent member states, they've been using it to can preserve their national interest and forgetting the global interest.
Now, taking a look at the Middle East, another equally important discussion is the fact that the UN Security Council seems rather toothless in enforcing some of its resolutions, particularly regarding Israel's Gaza war. Would you say this presents a risk to how it is perceived?
No, correctly. Remember, I said earlier that the UN security system have been lacking, have been toothless, has been very shady in its operation in the African continent, and also the Middle East question, which also began mostly during the beginning of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. When you think of the Genocide Act, it came same time with the UN human rights system, and during 1948. But when you look now on the question of the Middle East, you might want to blame the UN Security Council, but also you have other African countries who have also betrayed what we call the common African position, what we call a Zuluni consensus, that when African nations have to vote or debate on the Middle East, they need to have a common voice. But you have seen how the conflict in Middle East, how we saw many African countries siding with Israel, others with the US, and that has also defeated that purpose of having a global security and a global peace. But the question of the UN system, again, let's not only look at the UN Security Council, but the UN General Assembly, the UN agencies like the humanitarian aid, the Human Rights Council of the UN. Are they really analyzing? Are they really capturing? Are they really collecting real human rights violation? Or are they protecting the violators and the former colonizers? So it is very important that when we have to unmask the UN system, we have to look even all those African countries who have become what Malcolm X used to call them, the house niggers.
Finally, Advocate, how much longer do you think it will take for any of these reforms to actually happen?
It is the African century, the 21st century. Me and you, we should not cease to see it not happen, because we are owing this to our future generation. One will look, as you know, we have said we have to silence the guns in Africa by 2030. So maybe probably me and you will meet maybe after how many years? 6 years, and we say, did we reach that permanent seat in the UN Security Council? And like I said to you, this debate is now beginning next month, also at the UN General Assembly. Let's hope that by 2026, 2028, we might find something that the UN Security Council will have an African voice, will have an African representative, and will have a common African position, which the AU member states will have to choose which African state can be part of the UN Security Council. So I'm very optimistic. I don't want to talk about 2050 or 2063, because I don't think in 2063 I will still be alive. I will want to see it happening by the year 2030.
Now, Advocate, just in closing, I'd like for you to just extend a message to our viewers at home in terms of if these positions are to be occupied, let's be hopeful and say next year, 2 years or 3 years or so, what kind of, individual needs to be placed in such a position? Because you highlighted, how important and quite a responsibility the position comes with, and also highlighted some of the ills that comes with, how certain African countries are siding with the likes of Israel, with the likes of the US. So just in closing, looking at these permanent seats that might or will be filled very soon, who do you believe or what kind of individuals should actually occupy this position?
You will know that the member states that have been leading on peacekeeping missions, you have Nigeria in West Africa as one of the superpowers. We have seen South Africa also playing that role since 1996. We see Rwanda coming, emerging also Rwanda playing a key role in many countries. I won't say Kenya for now. Kenya is just doing a support system in Haiti. But I see Nigeria, South Africa, Algeria playing the key role, being one of the member states who will be playing that role in the UN Peace and Security Council, representing the African continent. I've chosen 2 countries for a reason. Nigeria, you think of ECOWAS, West Africa. South Africa, you think of SADC region. So that's how it is important that those are the 2 countries. And they should focus on issues like racism. They should focus on military coups. They should focus on the issues of even wars that have been going on for natural resources that we have seen in many African countries. And they should deal with illicit financial flows, because we have to always track. Whenever there's conflict in Africa, there is also capitalism thriving under the pretext of investment and humanitarian aid. So that's how it will be important for these member states. When they get into those permanent seats, they should deal and they should arrest those challenges and situations that might affect the African continent and broadly the global community.
Advocate, thank you so much for your insight as well as time in helping us understand, some of the details around the UNSC. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us this evening.
Asante sana, my sister.
Viewers at home, that was our guest this evening, Advocate Sipho Mantula, who is a researcher at the Thabo Mbeki School of Public as well as International Affairs, sharing in quite a very, very important conversation that impacts the continent as a whole. But that's where we close it off for now. Let's head over to an ad break. See you when we come back.